start our online seminar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the online seminar on Towards Autonomous Learning, Challenges and Opportunities Amid COVID-19, organized by English Language Education, Faculty of Languages and Arts, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta. In our program today, we have three distinguished speakers with us who will be sharing their thoughts and ideas on autonomous learning. The first presentations on autonomous learning, the point of no return, is delivered by Professor Fuad Abdul Hamid, PhD, from Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, Bandung. Following these presentations, Professor Swasi Madya, PhD, from Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, is delivering a topic on the improvement of learner autonomy, blessings in disguise in the pandemic situations. Finally, the last topic on enabler of learning, what suits us best, is presented by Associate Professor Dr. Siti Maftuhah Damio from University Teknologi Mara, Malaysia. Before proceeding to these presentations, I would like to read the short bios of our esteemed speakers. Professor Abdul Hamid, PhD, is a professor of language education at Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, Bandung. He obtained his bachelor degree from Institute of Teacher Training and Pedagogy, Bandung, while his MA in EFL and PhD are from the Department of Linguistics at SIUC, Illinois, USA. He is currently the president of Asia TEFL and a former president of the Association of TEFL in Indonesia, or TEFLIN. His teaching and research areas include language teaching and assessment, as well as language acquisitions. Professor Swasti Madya, PhD, is a professor in EFL teaching at Yogyakarta State University, or Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, finishing her doctoral in Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia. She focuses her research in English teaching. With a range of experiences in international cooperations and language teacher educations, she now views language teaching from multi-perspectives by relating it to other important matters, such as character educations, identity formations, and workplace establishment. Her research interest is around teacher and instructional developments with emphasis on autonomous learning. She has written a number of articles, among others, on self-assessment, teacher standards, curriculum development, and instructional model development. Associate Professor Dr. Siti Maftuhah Damio holds a doctorate degree from University of Nottingham, UK, a master's degree from University of Malaya, Malaysia, and a first degree from University of Southampton, UK. The amalgamations of educational exposure from local and abroad has strengthened her outlook in educating her students. Her specialization is on the teaching of English as a second or foreign or other languages. She's known as Dr. Maft among her students. She is attached to the Faculty of Education's University Teknologi Mara, and at present is a fellow at the VZ office. Ladies and gentlemen, during this online seminar, you're welcome to raise and write your questions in the Q&A room, and please identify to which speakers you address, and the selected questions will be answered after each presentation is delivered. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Fuad Abdul Hamid, PhD. The floor is yours, Prof. Fuad.
Right, I'll share screen first of all. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much to colleagues at Yogyakarta State University. Do you translate that into Yogyakarta State University or State University of Yogyakarta? I don't know which one is what is used.
Yogyakarta State University.
All right, Yogyakarta State University. So I use the wrong way here on my slide.
It's okay, Prof.
Okay. We will be talking and discussing autonomous learning in our presentations from me and then Prof. Suarsi Madia and Prof. Maftuha from Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, my talk will be organized into what, why, who, when, how, and so what regarding autonomous learning issues. There are some pictures on the slide. It doesn't have anything to do with autonomous learning, but it has something to do with my historical flow of my own personal life. But this is not time for discussing that issue now. Regarding the question of what, if we are talking about autonomous learning, we begin with the word learning itself, which is the process of acquiring, commonly it refers to the process of acquiring new understanding, knowledge, behavior, skills, values, attitudes, or whatever. And the ability to learn is possessed by humans. God bestows us with that ability. And as from our own experience, some learning is immediate, induced by simply a single event, but much skill and knowledge accumulate from repeated experiences through learning, through interaction, and so on and so forth. The second word is autonomy, capacity to make uncoerced decision. And these two then blended into what we call now in our discussion as autonomous learning. Now, if you take a look at our own experience, we have observed that in formal educational context, we know that the most successful learners are commonly autonomous. That is, they accept responsibility for their learning. They constantly reflect on what they are learning, why they are learning, how they are learning, and also with what degree of success. And their learning is commonly fully integrated with the rest of who and what they are. In the same way, when we are talking about learners, we scholars also, all successful scholars fit into the definition of learner autonomy. So, but now probably, I don't know whether you agree with me or not, that it is necessary for us to recognize that many successful scholars, many successful learners do not owe their autonomy to the pedagogical tradition in which they have been educated. So this is, I think, an important point for two reasons. First, it has existed, learner autonomy has existed for as long as there have been successful learners. And it can develop quite independently of teachers. Would you think so? The second point here is that paradoxically, autonomous learning suggests that learner autonomy could be looked at as a special instance of a somewhat more general set of human capacities. So that in principle, autonomous learning is available to anyone, not just to those with special intellectual or academic gifts. Now, if we take a look at autonomy as a universal human capacity, it is a capacity for independent behavior. And then autonomy, including in our context here in our schooling system, becomes the goal of what we call developmental learning. Whether we focus narrowly on first language acquisition, for example, or more generally on process of socialization and acculturation as a whole, it is clear that development is incomplete of a learner, of an individual, unless this individual can operate as an independent member of the society of which he or she belongs to. So clearly here, the concept of independent in this context carries some kind of an infinity of possible implications. There are so many things related to it, and determined by including local constraints, if we take a look at our context. Some provides us with definitions of what autonomy is. First, autonomy is commonly understood as indicated by Gathercole right here. It takes place when the learner is willing to and capable of taking charge of his own learning. And here, the concept of independence plays an important role, which meant that learners should have been able to choose their own goals, as well as materials, resources, methods, and tasks. And therefore, take a look at what Little says here. He has delineated learner autonomy as having the capacity of detachment, of critical reflection, of decision-making, and independent action. Now, if we take a look at some somewhat more practical perspective, Hughes relates autonomous learning to self-instruction, which involves an individual telling himself or herself to do something and then doing it. So it some kind of focusing on giving the learner the responsibility for instruction rather than relying upon a teacher or a facilitator. Thus, the responsibility for the instruction moved from the facilitator to the learner, him or herself. The next point is the question of why. I have finished with the question of what. Now the question of why. Why autonomous learning is considered as so important. Strictly speaking, when we are talking about information and knowledge concepts, information and knowledge concepts make sense in relation to our cognitive system. For example, what physically is transported by informatic system or by natural communication, data is data. And the data could be in the digital format, it could be in analogical format. What distinguishes data from information is the sense, which only exists as the result of our cognition capacity of the receiver working on the data received. So if we take a look at teaching learning situation in our context, we can see that when data becomes information and then afterwards become knowledge, then it would be meaningful. Take a look at this figure is quite good. Taking from Mr. Google gives me this very nice figure. If we take a look at this, Data and information are accessible through different technological media. And this is where comes the importance of being autonomous in learning, because data and information are accessible through different technological media. Every individual has equal access autonomously to data, to information. So individually, autonomous learning should take place in order to switch data into information. Of course, depending upon the context of each of you, the learners. So when meaningful, the data will become knowledge. The information will become knowledge if it is meaningful. And when it becomes part of your insight, then it will become part of what we call wisdom. So here, probably the role of a teacher would be to switch the position of any data gained by our learners in order for the data to become information, and the information become knowledge because of meaningfulness. And if it becomes part of the insights of our learners, then it would bring about better wisdom, understanding in different social activities of the learners themselves. Now, again, why autonomous learning is important? We have some advocates of learner autonomy here. Learner autonomy has been perceived by its advocates as learners' ability to make reflective, rational, conscious, and worthwhile decisions in the learning process, and has been considered as a desired education goal. Just like in our context, we insist that learner autonomy must be part of our educational activities. Autonomy is looked at as the degree to which an individual is able to reflect upon his or her desires, wishes, thoughts, in making decisions on their own, and in taking responsibility for him or her, for themselves. So if you take a look at consensus right now among advocates of learner autonomy, there has been overwhelming consensus among advocates on the benefits of learner autonomy, and probably why our seminar is right now taking the topic of autonomous learning, because we looked at it as having some benefits for our learners, especially in our field, is for learning a foreign language. Now, if we take a look at this, numerous studies have been conducted to explore autonomy. If we take a look at literature in the Asian context, there have been several studies exploring the potential of autonomy for language teaching. Even though we know that there are different types of autonomy in developing learner-oriented outcomes, but they remains, and I also believe, as an indispensable goal in various education settings. But ladies and gentlemen, in spite of strong proponents of learner autonomy, we also have a number of opponents. We have some criticism of learner autonomy. So while strong support for learner autonomy has continued, criticisms have emerged. For example, some educational philosophers valued autonomy but argued against some of its aspects. Some researchers argued that autonomy is of limited value, and that we have some other elements that we have to take a look at. For example, wants, feelings, emotions, and interdependence. They should be included when we are talking about learning, not simply looking into autonomous ideas. Take, for example, the researcher by the name of Hand in 2006. He strongly argued against the role of autonomy in education. He proposed that autonomy should be looked at as a required feature of personhood. So autonomy should not be an educational goal, he said. He referred to an autonomous person as an individual who is free to determine her own actions. So this is because the declaration of an autonomous person, which is not psychological, but rather political. That's in his perspective. And therefore, in line with this understanding, he proposes two senses of autonomy. One is what he calls circumstantial autonomy, and the second one is dispositional autonomy. So circumstantial autonomy indicates a freedom from any external conditions on the way an individual lives. This type of person is not imposed upon by external factors and is not compelled to follow others' instructions. This kind of autonomy is often considered desirable. However, this particular researcher by the name of Hand argued that learner autonomy cannot be taught, cannot be learned, because it was the external conditions that restricted a person, not the internal character. That's what he calls circumstantial autonomy. The second one, dispositional autonomy, is the one which is teachable, which is learnable, because dispositional autonomy refers to the inclination to determine one's own actions. And I think when we are talking about learner autonomy ourselves right now in this seminar, we are referring to this concept of autonomous learning. That is the concept which refers to the inclination to determine one's own deeds, one's own actions. So dispositional autonomy should not be established as an educational aim. That's what he said, because the effect of cultivating dispositional autonomy in pupils would make their lives even more difficult. That's what he said. But the second one, the dispositional autonomy, is teachable and it is possible to be developed. The other item is the concept of the point of no return. I put this phrase on the topic of my presentation, the point of no return. Why, to me, autonomous learning is important? Because this relates to the idea of the point of no return. As you probably know, that the term point of no return actually originated as a technical term in air navigation, referring to the point on a flight at which a plane has just enough fuel to return to the airfield from which it departed. And beyond that point, the option is closed. And in its metaphorical sense, passing the point of no return can be used synonymously with, some of you would probably remember, crossing the Rubicon. That is taking a course of action with significant and unreversible consequences. Some of you would probably remember Julius Caesar, 49 BC, who crossed the Rubicon. The Rubicon is actually the river separating Rome from Italy, and where Julius Caesar lived at that time. And he violated Roman law Julius Caesar violated Roman law and rendered armed conflict as something inevitable at that time. And then he said, alea iacta est, which means the die is cast. So when the die is cast, this one is said when a situation is certain to develop in a particular way because decisions have been taken and cannot be changed. We cannot reverse our direction. Now, the situation of autonomous learning right now is at that point, the point of no return. And to me, this position is everybody's, belonging to every single human being. When the point of no return is placed in the framework of psychology, it has something to do with what's going on in our thinking mechanism, in our cognitive structure, in thought. Some psychologists believe that the point of no return may not have a distinct anatomical locus. Why? Because thinking is distributed throughout the brain, engaging language, engaging perception, engaging memory, and the motor system. However, it may have distinct structural loci in the points of transition between mental states from one state in our thinking mechanism leading to another state. The transition between states are constrained by logic and habit, and so on and so forth. But the most important thing to us is the idea that thought is often a social activity, sharing ideas by acting and talking together, by our position in transferring what we have in our thought to the learners or to other people around us. So we can see in our day life that the transfer of a thought from one person to another constitute a point of no return. Why? Because when, let's say, the speaker commits the listener to think certain thoughts, and those thoughts give rise to others through logic and association. And the commitment can be dramatic. Take a simple example, ladies and gentlemen. If, for example, when one person says, "I love you," there is no turning back. The assertion may or may not lead to the desired actions, but the thoughts it causes are irrevocable. Relationships are never the same after those words are uttered, and this is very important. So when we use our language saying something, we cannot revert, and therefore we need to be able as autonomous learners to learn so many things behind all the words that we might utter at one particular context of time to other people. Now the question of who. Who does what as to autonomous learning? I don't know how much time left right now. Now it's 9 already. I think adolescents, like students in senior high school and university students would be considered as adolescents, some. They would seek to develop their adult identities. They seek increasing autonomy from their parents, for example, and become more peer-oriented. There is research conducted by Umamah and Cahyono here. Umamah and Cahyono. I know Cahyono, and you probably know Pak Cahyono from Universitas Negeri Malang. And this is a research trying to investigate Indonesian EFL students' use of self-regulated writing strategies and to identify whether what types of self-regulated writing strategies applied by the students. But the most important thing here that we should take a look at is the finding of this research. Okay, that self-regulated learning strategies are appropriately used in process-oriented writing, since students have an ample chance to develop their metacognitive knowledge. So what is revealed in this study is important for us, that when learners have become at the adolescent and above level, then they would have the ability to use self-regulated strategies in learning. Umamah and Cahyono have indicated here that the strategies that they have shown here in the writing process is by seeking help from others and making use of resources to accomplish the writing task. However, they still find it challenging to set goals to achieve certain writing tasks consistently, and some of them were not confident with their ability in writing. But the most important thing here is that we learn from this research that autonomy develops better as proficiency gets better. Meaning, when language learners have better proficiency in the language, in the target language being learned, then their autonomy levels would also develop into a better position. Still the question of when here. Maturity is also important. When maturity is reached in conceiving responsibility, then autonomy would also be grasped. There is here a study conducted by Mulyani, Suherdi, and Sundayana this year. Among the learning factors which are important is conception. There is the belief of the learners about the learning, which would trigger the level of autonomy of the learners themselves. Now, from the perspective of psychology, specifically developmental psychology, then we can see that autonomy emphasizes learners' mental processes. The development of learner autonomy gains support from the notion that knowing and thinking develop through experience. Cognitive approaches to communicative language teaching, for example, are based on the view that learning a language is an individual psychological act. If we take a look at the theory of constructivism, it has great influence on this development. It is different from the positivist views, which see knowledge as an accurate reflection of objective reality that can be discovered and taught. But constructivism sees knowledge as a reorganization and restructuring of experience. A little bit difficult to be taught, but this is where we as teachers have the duty to try to help our learners in reorganizing and restructuring experience so that they would become part of their knowledge. Now, the next part is the question of how. And how do we enhance autonomy of the learners? Take a look at a study conducted by Bunma and Swatavacharkul, two scholars from Thailand, in a journal published here on our campus, trying to examine the effect of autonomous learning process on learner autonomy. By having the idea of improving the ability of speaking of their students, and found in the beginning that speaking ability should begin and should be triggered and should be strengthened by motivation to speak, by critical thinking skills, by creativity of the students, and by social interaction skills. Especially when talking about speaking, we need to learn how to captivate the audience, for example. I don't know whether I am captivating the audience right now or not. But those are the point. And basically, their finding is that developing all those items are very important in improving the level of autonomy of the learner, and the level of autonomy of the learner would have some impact on improving their ability in speaking. Another how is what has been described by Tang in a book published in 2019, that since the beginning of the 21st century, the theory and practice of autonomy has evolved considerably in response to the changing landscape of foreign language education. See, if you take a look at autonomous learning concept, it is deeply rooted in both Western and Eastern thought. Galileo and also Laozi in 571 BC talk about give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And this principle is, I think, very good for us to take a look at in developing autonomy level of our learners in order for them to become successful language learners. Not simply by giving the fish, but we have to give the learners the ability to be able to fish by him or herself. This is from a somewhat divine perspective, ladies and gentlemen. The idea of being autonomous, being an individual which develops, has also been put forward in the Quran. For those of you coming from Pesantren, you could probably take a look at this. Take, for example, that you have to have your own responsibility in developing yourself. وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ وَأَحْسِنُوا. Do not throw yourselves with your own hands into destruction, meaning you yourself should be responsible for that. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ رَهِينَةٌ. Every soul, for what it has earned, will be subject or held responsible. So autonomous learning is a matter of responsibility taking by our own. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما أتاها سيجعل الله بعد عسر يسرا. Allah does not charge a soul except according to what He has given it, meaning your own ability will determine the success as conceived by yourselves. So the question of how has something to do with teacher identity. Very often, autonomous learning process cannot be conducted simply because you as teachers have your own conception of what teacher identity is. If the teacher identity has something to do with power, being a teacher and should be considered as knowing everything, and you are delivering things to your learners, you are better and more knowledgeable than your learners. If that's your identity, then it would be very difficult for you to enhance the level of autonomy in our learners. So teacher identity and autonomy. Of course, the teachers themselves should have autonomy, but at the same time, autonomy is dynamic in nature. meaning it should be dependent upon the context, it should be dependent upon who the learners are, and so on and so forth. And the most important thing here, and I think is thank you for your kind attention to my talk. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all from me. Hello? Halo, Bu Anita.
Nggak masuk suaranya Bu Anita. Bu Anita nggak masuk suaranya. Halo? Cannot hear you.
Hello, test.
Yeah, okay. Now it's okay.
Thank you for the insightful presentations, Prof. Fuad. Now I would like to invite 3 questions from the audience. We have 2 questions so far. First, from Pak Agus Widiantoro, as teachers, what must we do to improve learners' autonomy? And the second question is, how can people have an ability in learning autonomous if the students do not have motivations to learn? Yeah, the first question is, what must we do to improve learners' autonomy as teachers, Prof. Fuad?
A very difficult question to answer. But basically, when we are talking about autonomy, as mentioned by one of the researchers that I mentioned earlier, like Han, for example, who does not believe that autonomy could be taught. Yeah. But for us, when we would like to develop autonomous learning in our students, number one, the teachers should provide good examples as an autonomous person, him or herself. Meaning, the teachers themselves should try to show to their students that they have been doing and working so many things on his or her own in order to gain new knowledge, switching data into information, information into knowledge, and show it to your students. And they would probably copy the way your autonomy has been presented to your students. That's number one. So by example. And number two, of course, we have to show to our students that even a teacher is a learner. There is a proverb or a good wise statement said that when one person is teaching to another person, and there will be 2 persons learning actually, meaning you as a teacher is not simply teaching when you are teaching, but you are also learning at the same time. So in order for you to be able to gauge the ability of our learners in terms of being better and more autonomous, we have to provide spaces in our activity for them to do on their own, not simply by spoon feeding all the materials given, but let them do it on their own initiatives. That's probably the 2 recipes that I could give you. And the second question was?
The second question is, how can people have the ability in learning autonomous if students do not have motivations to learn? How can students have an ability or the ability in learning autonomous if they do not have motivation to learn?
Okay, the simple way is just ask students of that kind to go home. Yeah, that is the simple way of doing it, because motivation is number one. But again, of course, as a teacher, each of you has the responsibility to try to motivate your students in learning, because there is a possibility that motivation does not develop simply because you are there, because of you teachers. Sometimes I would feel myself when I come into the classroom and my level of voice is somewhat showing that I am lazy and I am so tired, then you are spreading the aroma of being bored and tired as well to your students. So motivation could also be developed from you teachers, just like now, although I went to bed very late last night because of completing my slides. But I'm trying to show you that I am so energetic, but actually I'm tired, you know. By showing it, then it would motivate. Raise your voice, and the students could get motivated. Simple things in the classroom show that you are very active yourselves, and the students could be motivated. How could our students be motivated when you look so tired? You look so gloomy entering your classroom. So show to your students that you are yourself motivated, and it would share the energy from inside you to your students. Okay, thank you.
We have two more questions, Prof. Fuad.
What time is it? Because I have to switch to a different.
One more questions. One more questions, Prof. Fuad. One more question.
Okay, one more question is okay.
Yes. From Pak Agus Darwanto, Prof. Fuad. So, do you teach your students to be autonomous learners, knowing that they are proponents and opponents to the idea?
It's always like that, you know. When there is an idea, there would be opponents, there would be proponents. Now, it would be dependent upon you yourself. Do you belong to a person who would buy the idea of the importance of autonomous learning or not? If not, then don't worry. Stay away from it. But if you do, still, and I believe that no matter whether autonomy is something teachable or not, but to me, there is an aspect, even somebody that opposed the idea of learner autonomy as the goal of in education, but still saying that there are two types of autonomy, dispositional and contextual autonomy. But the first one, dispositional autonomy, belongs to very personal capacity of the learner, but the contextual one could probably be improved. Okay, thank you very much. Bu Suarsi will provide you with better examples.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prof. Fuad, for answering all the questions. Well, ladies and
presentation.
gentlemen,
Sorry,
yes.
I cannot respond to all the questions given from each of you. I do hope any questions for me could be addressed to Professor Suarsi and Professor Maftuha. They will provide you with better explanations on what you want to know more. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
See you later.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, then I would like to invite the next speaker, Ibu Professor Suarsi Madya, PhD. She is going to deliver a topic on the improvement of learner autonomy, blessings in disguise in the pandemic situations. The floor is yours, Prof. Suarsi.
Thank you very much. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ibu Anita, for having introduced me at the beginning. Hopefully, all of you join this webinar have met me before. If not, then welcome. Now, you have listened to Prof. Fuad, who has given the macro ideas of learner autonomy and autonomous learning, but I would like to go into more a bit detail and how to do it at the end. But probably it's scattered here and there because I also had to stay awake last night up to 1 o'clock to prepare for this. Okay, so just a moment. Okay, that's my now I would like you to what's that? Realize that the COVID pandemic has a very big impact on our life, especially on schools or education. I just I have taken from the data from the website that, you know, this is the number of the students impacted by this pandemic. Look at this one here, almost 1 billion, right? So these are all our primary to senior secondary school. You have 831 what's that, million and to 21,000 learners. And about the higher education here, tertiary education is this one here. What about Indonesia? Indonesia is this one, 60 million, more than 60 million in pre-primary and senior secondary schools, and more than 8 million in tertiary education. So, you know, you can imagine how big is the impact on education and other sectors too. And then, of course, from the old normal, we have to go to the new normal life. People gathering, I think the Malaysia too, you know, and Indonesia, the same people like together before used to gather, but now we have to have social distancing, and of course decreasing level of social. I can see why social relations. Then work from home. We used to work from office, now work from home. The empty offices and schools. Traveling, now I have to cancel my travels. We have to stay home. It's now in my house. Then decreasing economic activities. Then take health matters for granted before. Now applying health protocol. And it means that this decreasing life comfort. Then we have face-to-face classroom learning, ICT-based teaching and learning, then loss of warm interaction in the classroom. So this is, I think we all have experienced all of this. So what should I do? Okay, is there any positive impact on the COVID-19 pandemic, especially on learning autonomy? That's the question. To be able to answer this question, we have to know what is meant by autonomy. I think I just want to not repeat, but later on will be more detail in that. Autonomy, learning autonomy. Sorry, I cannot. How can I remove the picture? Your picture is there. Sorry. Why is it important and what factors may influence it? Some have been discussed by Pak Fuad, but I see it from different angles, okay? So what should I do? Now, in fact, when we have, back to the philosopher here, autonomy, according to Kant, is the right for one to make their own decisions, excluding any interference from others. Then the capacity to make such decisions through one's own independence of mind and after personal reflection. I think some points have been mentioned by Pak Fuad. Then the third one is an ideal way of living life autonomously. So this one is autonomy is the moral right one possesses or the capacity we have in order to think and make decisions for oneself providing some degree of control or power over the events that unfold within one's everyday life. So, you know, every one of us, in fact, will experience this. Then Nietzsche here, according to him, autonomy is referred to as the free self and entails several aspects of the self, including self-respect. It means that this is the, Kant's influence. Then even self-love, there's Aristotle's influence. If we look back to the Aristotle's philosophy here. So you have self-respect, is very important. Self-love. So valuing ethical autonomy can help solve the love or self-love and law self-respect conflict. You know, sometimes we have vested interest, right? But it means that we forget self-respect. But if you combine the two, we'll be reaching the experience of self-responsible. This one can realize through experiences of being self-responsible, meaning that we need to combine freedom and self-responsibility. That's a very important point. I'll take it later in the last slide. Now, in reality, every adult member of society is held accountable and responsible for whatever he or she has done at community, personal, community, and state levels. This is because it is her choice to do or not to do it. Prof. Otto has have that relating to the Quran, but I'll give it later. So once independence or responsible freedom, I mean independence means responsible freedom, will contribute to the establishment of autonomous life. So let's see here. Oh my God. So what does it mean when we say autonomous life? An autonomous life is one in which a person charts his own course of through, the photo is, how can I remove the photo? Okay. Through life, fashioning his character by self-consciously choosing projects or assuming commitments from a wide range of eligible alternatives and making something out of his life according to his own understanding of what is valuable and worth doing. Understanding of what is valuable and worth doing. So described, autonomy is a distinctive ideal. It applies to a person's whole life or to a large stretches of it. So what is required of an autonomous person? The first one is the capacity to form complex intention and sustain commitments. Number two, the self-consciousness and vigor necessary to take control of one's affairs. Then number three, independence necessary to chart one's own course through life and to develop one's own understanding of what is valuable and worth doing. Number four is access to an environment that provides one with a wide range of valuable options. So this will answer the Pak Agus question later on. So we have to need, this one is related to mental capacity and virtues, to see the moral, virtues there. Then this one, number three, is related to one's relation with another person who can exercise power over one. Then number four is related to the environment in which one lives. So this is that one here. Now, I would like to remind us all, this is for those who, I believe that those who join the seminar are believers, okay? In fact, freedom or responsibility, independence in fact, when God grants life to an embryo, this is life starts, it's really totally dependent, right? Totally dependent that one. But later on, when one dies, then return to God. So he or she will be held totally responsible for what he has done. So I mean, to be independent, to be able to make independent decisions is a necessity for believers. So learning to be independent is a necessity because of this one. not only in the world, but later on after that. Then learning to exercise responsible freedom is a humanity obligation. And this is my own statement. So people is from being totally dependent at birth, this is my spelling, to fully independent after death. So that is my framework here, underlying my belief that all teachers have to help students develop their autonomy. Now let's see now what is meant by that one. Now, different version of autonomy, technical, the art of learning a language, they be related to language learning, outside the framework of an education institution and without an intervention of a teacher. It is technical. Psychological, the capacity which allows learners to take more responsibility for their own learning. Political, the conditions that allow learners to control the process of content learning, as well as institutional context within which learning takes place. Then social, the capacity to interact and collaborate with others. So if we can combine these in our understanding, it will be good. Then that's autonomy. Now, what is learning autonomy? I think before 80s, many people discussed about that, but Hollick is the first to really formally define learning autonomy. So this is the first definition that I quote to in my dissertation too at that time. The ability to take charge of one's learning, to have and to hold the responsibility for all the decisions concerning all aspects of this learning. I highlight here, responsibility, decision, then aspects of this learning. So referring to decision-making abilities concerning management and organization of learning, this is very important here. Another definition is learners' ability and willingness to make choices independently. There's a little wood here. So ability and willingness. This is again, make choices. Willingness depends on having both motivation. I think someone is asking about motivation and confidence to take responsibility for the choices required. So please remember the point so that later on we can discuss that. The third one is developing, that is here. Autonomy is not one innate, one's all, but this is a developing capacity on the part of learners to accept responsibility for their learning. So it's in the process. Of course, self-directed learning process through processes for reflection. Pak Fuad is also mentioned reflection, understanding learning processes and language functions. Then because of this, then they have take initiative and control of their learning. Remember here, take initiative and control here is two combination. So autonomy was considered as a natural product of the practice of self-directed learning, which the objectives, progress, and evaluation of learning are determined by the learners themselves. So always decision and determination of the learners themselves. Then this one, the next, the active independent management of learning, where the learner sets or attempts to control the goals, curriculum, pedagogical method, and content of the learning program. I think this is also later on when you remember the learner negotiated curriculum, and you have constructivism is here. So you have, so I have to move the picture again. What is that? How can I remove this? Self-management involving decision-making again. Decision-making abilities that learner needs to possess. Sorry. So what should I do? Now, how can the learning autonomy be used? For situations in which learners study entirely of their own, for a set of skills which can be learned and applied in self-regular learning. So you have the skills here. For an inborn capacity, which is suppressed by institutional education, for the exercise of learners' responsibility of their own learning, and the right of learners to determine the direction of their own learning. So I think these 5 situations can be found in real life. Now, there are 13 here, characteristics of that. That autonomy is construct of capacity. Remember this capacity here. Then willingness here is again. Autonomy involves willingness on the part of the learner to take responsibility. So remember, one question is related to motivation. If when learners have no motivation, so this is the willingness should be built there. Capacity and willingness of learners to take such responsibility is not necessarily innate. That's it's not inborn. You know, it's not born there. Complete autonomy is an idealistic goal. You see, I believe in that. Complete means absolute. There is no absolute. Therefore, later on, my picture will show that. There are degrees of autonomy, a matter of degree. The degrees of autonomy are unstable and variable. They fluctuate, sometimes up and sometimes down. Autonomy is not simply a matter of placing learners in a situation where they are have to be independent. And developing autonomy requires conscious awareness of the learning process. That is conscious reflection and decision making. Promoting autonomy is not simply a matter of teaching strategies. So, so autonomy is very complex, in fact. Autonomy can take place both inside and outside the classroom. Autonomy has social and as well as individual dimension. Then the promotion of autonomy has a political as well as psychological dimensions. Then autonomy is interpreted differently by different cultures. So the 13 statements here show how complex autonomy is. So if we want our student to be independent, to be autonomous, we have to design that to a process. Pak Fuad has given two recipe, but I will show more. It's more detailed. But example, yes. And, Brown has mentioned we have to enjoy people, showing our enthusiasm, etc., etc. So just a moment. So capacity of autonomy is not an innate skill. This is my position, but something which can be nurtured, improved through an ongoing process. So this is an ongoing process. So to develop capacity for autonomy, learners most are not yet autonomous are involved in the process of acquiring the ability to assume responsibility for their learning. So I think I strongly believe in this. So students sometimes still very dependent. I think it's okay. So we have to help them to gain confidence, and their motivation should be aroused. But confidence is very important. I have mentioned one there. So in short, autonomy is a relative rather than complete notion. The capacity which may, sorry, my computer is why? Which may be limited, especially at the early stages of learners' foray into autonomy. Now, Little writes that autonomy is not a steady state, but rather a capacity which fluctuates and develops. Thus understood, autonomous learning can be developed, nurtured, and encouraged. Autonomous learning is not an all or nothing phenomenon. There are degrees of autonomy. Autonomous learning and autonomous learning success. It's very important points to remember later on. Just a moment. So this one here is the I don't want to do. Can you tell me how to do with the pictures? Because the pictures are covering the my slide.
What pictures, Ibu?
Your picture. It's okay now. It's okay, but moving here. So remember here, that's only responsibility. Then develop transfer. There's a skill. The skill here, study skill. If Jamila says, she is concerned with that. Time management, IT skill, interpersonal skill, etc. That is that's called transferable skill in autonomous learning, and actively manage their learning. Then seeking out learning opportunities and using appropriate learning strategies, that is very important too. Then involve learners in an interactive process in which they set short and long-term learning objectives, reflect on and evaluate progress. So in addition, autonomous for language learners has been described as a process sorry, a process that enables learners to recognize and assess their own needs, to choose and apply their own learning strategies or styles, eventually leading to effective management of learning. So, to foster learning autonomy, it is necessary to develop a sense of responsibility and encourage the learners themselves to make decisions. So you have, I often say this, responsibility and freedom, I think should be combined. Freedom of making decisions and responsibility for the action. So, sorry. Can I drink first?
Yes, Bu.
Sorry, because
It's okay.
sorry. Free, interdependent aspect, the learning management, cognitive process, there's metacognitive, and learning content. So later we will relate that to the. So who is then autonomous learner? I will remind me and us all here, Rousseau, it's long ago, has formulated what is meant by autonomous learner. It's someone who is obedient to a law that he prescribes to himself. That's very important. Obedient to a law that he prescribes to himself. So autonomous learners are learners who have insights into their learning styles and strategies, take an active approach to learning tasks at hand, are willing to take risks, are good guessers, attend to form as well as content, that is place importance, accuracy as well as appropriacy, develop the target language into a separate reference system, and are willing to revise and reject hypotheses and rules that do not apply, and have a tolerant and outgoing approach to the target language. That's very important here, demanding the autonomous learners what they can do. But little remind us all the 5 misconceptions of learning autonomy. Misconception 1, autonomy is synonymous with self-instruction. Essentially a matter of deciding to learn without a teacher. This is not that, it's not that simple. Misconception 2, in the classroom context, learner autonomy somehow requires the teacher to relinquish all initiative and control. Now, I think it's not that, it's a complete absolute, but it's not. Misconception 3, autonomy is something teachers do not do to their learners. In other words, that is a new methodology. I think it's not a new methodology. Misconception 4, autonomy is single, easily described behavior. Autonomy manifests itself in different ways, in fact, so it's not single, easily described behavior. Okay. This is why I have this very complex. Misconception 5, autonomy is a steady state for that one. How much time we have that one? So you have the dependence and independence. So from fully dependence and fully independent, we have the relative dependence and relative independence. I will be quick. So this is the process from this one. You have the responsibility, but you have the partnership with tutors and other students, and reflection. You have a create then constructive, being constructive phase, then challenge that. Learning how to learn, that's the students towards the autonomy. They have to learn how to learn, and they have to learn to assess their own learning, their self and peer assessment here. Then Prof. Fuad has dispositional autonomy and that one here. So we have to train this one first, and then they are able. That is the framework here. You can read it yourself later on. So in short, this training and then this ability. Then Noonan has formulated 5 here in learning, language learning, beginning with awareness, involvement, intervention, creation, transcendence. So you have the process here, and you have the content here. You know, this. I think it's very important for to remember this one here. just I would like to now factors influence learner autonomy here. The role of the learner themselves, you know, the motivation, your desire, the ability. Then the role of the teachers, whether the teacher-student relationship, trust, cooperation, comfort, secure feeling. I think Pak Fuad has touched upon this. We have to make the students feel at home in our classroom, feel trusted, feel respected, that we can help them in developing their autonomy. Type of tasks, choices of tasks, collaborative learning, project-based learning. Then role of the environment, what is whether the environment will conducive for the teachers to for the children to learn how to be responsible. Then also social fact aspects here. Their friends, families, teachers, and what kind of interaction, situational aspects. Also, this is a research study. Then in Indonesia, also Kamala has found here that learners themselves, psychological factors, laziness, etc., environment, tasks, teacher, materials influence them. Then you have Tran and Duong also found the positive and drawbacks of the autonomy based on portfolio-based writing here. So you have positive results and drawback here, result here. Then this is what I'm trying to find in literature to support my title after knowing what is meant by autonomy and that one. Autonomy can be classified into two. First is proactive autonomy and reactive autonomy. So proactive affirms the learner's individuality and sets up a direction which they themselves have partially created. But here, reactive, which do not create its own, like now because of the COVID, once the direction has been initiated, enables the learners to organize their resources. So does not create that one here. So Littlewood argued that although many writers proactive, the proactive autonomy is the only kind of that counts, but reactive autonomy held its place either step towards that one. So I believe in the existence of reactive autonomy. Now with the COVID, they are forced to be independent, for example. So because of that, reactive autonomy and how far wants to go encouraging autonomy suggest will be dictated by this one here. So my question is, well, what impact has the COVID-19 pandemic had on learning autonomy? Now, before answering this, this one here, I would like to have this one here, just for 3 minutes. Oh my God, cannot be open. How come? Okay, if not, then this is my point. Okay, COVID-19 have people have named you. You have indeed made everyone everywhere, all eyes and all ears at any news on you. You, COVID-19, have indeed made everyone care. With your invisible nature of being minute, yet with your devastating power, no doubt, you have invited both a curse and salute, making some worse, yet others more devout. You have interrupted the former's indulgence, preventing them from reaching their worldly destiny. Yet you have made the latter contemplate for correction, committed to returning to the right path to their route through destiny. You have stopped a few people's arrogant claims about their superiority of health, military power, medicine, science, and technology. In times of undeniable difficulty and sorrow you have easily created, peoples around the globe have suddenly become altruistically motivated. You have made pharmacologists, medical scientists, and associates work extra hard to find the very medicine to cure your victims. You have made families return to a sort of life they should have always create, to share moments of happiness, mutually care when the life lamp dims. You've done your great job with no discrimination at all. You've spread rapidly throughout the globe to reach all, to threat and attack people, no matter what they do for sure. heads of states, ministers, medical doctors, the rich and the poor. But some have observed you have complied with the divine law. You respect people living a healthy life and then just pass by. You remind those being apathetic about health that you're poor. But I wonder why you have no mercy on the doctors standing by. You, COVID-19, you have made many people wonder with no pauses. What kind of mission God has sent you with to go around the world, forcing every leader to rethink their ways to manage their resources. You, COVID-19, you have indeed changed how people live on this earth. So this is my observation of the impact. Now go to the that one here. Now let's refresh our mind, or how suddenly our situation changed unpredictably. The COVID-19 pandemic broke out and spread rapidly throughout the world with a lot of victims. People around the world were forced to reduce, change, even stop activities. The education has been terribly impacted by this devastating pandemic. Many parts of the world experience countrywide school closures, whereas the areas localized. So this is data I have seen before. Suddenly, the online learning, be it prepared or unprepared, had to be carried out. Learners have to, learners have to study from home. They had to learn through technology, probably feeling lonely. They had to learn to be more independent. The teachers' lectures had to change the mode of delivery. They had to use technology to carry out their own learning. Some people are happy. Some people are very happy. Young lecturers are very happy. Everyone had to change it in March, starting March, to enter the new normal. Everyone had to learn many aspects, and the impact can be negative and positive. Now, I'm always sure that any incident, accident, disaster always has both advantages and disadvantages. I have expressed this in my poem. In line with this, the COVID-19 pandemic may have positive impacts on our life, part of which is on learning, especially learning autonomy. I have assumed that my students may have learned to be more autonomous. With a very limited time, I did a small survey through a Google form, and 64 students responded to the questionnaire. The result fulfilled my assumption. The following slide presents a summary of the results in graphic form. So this is the result here. This is strongly agree, blue, and this one is agree. So you can see that, in fact, for example, here, they learn to communicate better, they manage the time better, they learn to be better organized learning activities, independent search for information in the internet is more, and etc. here. So the further research has to be done, and to find out what they expect in this independent learning, for example. Do they need training, for example, etc. Then in relation to the plan here, metacognitive, they more aware, they became more aware of the learning plan, for example. So, you have, I don't want to read all of this, but my assumption has been fulfilled. Now, considering the importance of autonomy as has been raised at the beginning, we as educators should help our students to develop their autonomy through a process which designed to encourage the student to make decisions. This is to learn to make decisions, independent decisions, and to implement their decision responsibly. The model of learning which is worth considering is project-based learning, then which can be structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. I think if we apply that, Pak Agus' question will be answered. But I don't want to talk about problem-based learning, because in problem-based learning, problem and project-based learning, the students are trained to make decisions and to implement the decision and to revise the decision, to make better plan, etc., etc. The result of that. So that is what I want to share. Thank you very much. Hopefully it will be useful. Thank you. Bu Anita, I will return it to you.
Yes, thank you, Ibu Professor Suarsi Madya, for the inspiring presentations. Then there are some questions for Ibu.
Yeah.
So the first question is from Pak Ahmad Sugianto. The question is, what can we do as teachers to make our students, especially those that are still in the primary school,
Mhm.
able to learn autonomously, particularly in these current conditions?
Okay. It's a very good question. Primary school in this current condition. I try to. I have grandchildren in my house, so this is what I have done. Choosing for example, the YouTube, you choosing everything should be related to something which is useful, but the usefulness, of course, they don't know. We have to guide them. So guide them to make decision based on their understanding of the use by comparing which one is useful, which one is not in relation to one another. It's not easy, but sometimes they understand, like decision in the daily life can be used, can be exercised during with the primary school. So decision making in primary school should be, for primary school students, should be related to their level of development and their life, in daily life. I think all lessons can be related to their daily life. So if this one, so which one? If this one, and an example is, for example, my granddaughter, for example, wants me to stay so to play with her all the time. So I look, will you choose me to stay with you, but I don't have any money because I don't work, so I cannot buy you candy, or you let me just go for an hour, for example, to work in my room, and she can think, finally she let me go. This is a kind of decision making, which is responsible decision making. So this you can adapt this in your primary school teaching, or choosing the topic, for example, choosing between two readings, between two stories, between whatever colors, etc. Why? Just exercises of choosing, and according to that.
Yes, thank you, Ibu. The next question is from Ibu Nurzaida. If being autonomous is closely related to traits and virtues, how can we nurture it to the heterogeneous students?
To what? To
To the heterogeneous students, how can we nurture traits and virtues to the heterogeneous students?
I know, different people, different groups of people, right? Of students. Some high ability, low ability, etc.
Yes.
Remember the concept of learning from one another. And I think being autonomous sometimes is, from the social perspective, they also can decide to help or not to help, to interact or not to interact. So I would like to suggest that I observe in for example, in Melbourne long ago, that the student decides to choose which friends they will go with, but the teacher asked them to think about helping those who have, for example, who is good at music. He or she will entertain the class. Those who are good at maths, for example, and he or she has to find someone who needs help. So the decision making, but let them decide which one. So training is very simple sometimes, but making decision is very important. And there is nothing wrong here, no right or wrong. That, but the students are trained to see, if you have this one, this is a possible consequence. If you do that, is the possible consequence. So at the early stage, the autonomy is still being nurtured, and the teacher has to be more patient than those teaching in higher level of education. I admire those teaching primary schools, because they enter the psychological life of the children, and they are very patient, etc. So I cannot do that. So, I think gently you have to prevent discrimination. Like, don't show that you favor the intelligent one and you are not patient with the slow one. So challenge the exceptionally high intelligence students with a task, and be patient with lesser ability students. But you have to encourage cooperation between the two. If you are teaching Muslim students, you encourage those who are more able to infaq in knowledge, infaq in the skill. So I always relate to the beliefs of the students. Those are who, in fact, all religious students have that virtuous, that one here. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Ibu. The next question is from Ibu Nuri Supriyanti. Learning should be effective. What if the supposed autonomous learners, due to their being young, are not on the right track of their learning?
Well, in fact, right or wrong, what I mean is the right track and the wrong track, it depends, So the autonomous learner should be trained in deciding the direction of learning. So the direction should be left with them. If this is higher education, what kind of knowledge or skill they want to reach, what level, for example. So the lecturer or the teacher asks the student to plan how to reach that goal. I think there is nothing wrong in the way to reach, and if we have the syllabus, for example, we have to show this is the goal of the syllabus, and we negotiate whether it's too high or too that one, and stick to that. So the way is up to them how to reach the goal. So discussion with the student will be number one. If you have different perspectives of the learning, especially in higher education, we have to negotiate whether about the goal or the content, the way of learning, of course, depending on their learning strategy, learning styles, and the strategies they have been trained. And we just show the way. Sometimes what we show to them is not acceptable to them, but this is their right to decide. That is autonomous learning. I have read a question from Ibu Lufti something from UNESA alumni about the use of reading novels, etc. Of course, you can use any materials. The important thing is let them decide. Their novel, which novel, this group project, for example, analyzing the novels, etc. Let them decide which novel and why. Yeah, they have to write why they have decided that novel, for what purpose they. But so reading novel is just a means to help the students in deciding on making decision and implementing the decision in responsibly. So the target goal is the improvement of the learning autonomy. This is Ibu Lufti.
Bu Lufi Marini Lukman, from UNESA. Yes, another question, Ibu. The question is from Ibu Endang Nila. Are there any strategies to develop learning autonomy for foreign language students of SMA who are considered as beginner students?
Yes. Of course, that is through. I have said that through project-based learning. It should be, for example, project-based learning of creating drama, and the topic is their own world. I have observed in one of the SMBs in Jogja, they and one of the SMAs in DIY in Wonosari, they, the project in the project-based learning scheme here, the students decided together to do a project using the language. One of the project I have observed is creating poster. Then the poster is about the life issues, the current issues like environment, health, etc. So, you know, with a limited language, but the teacher facilitated with the vocabulary, with the text for the content, and they are learning from that. They produce a very good poster. And then the what is remembered is don't don't say that this wrong, this right, but appreciate first. Oh, that's good, but it will be better that if your grammar, for example, did that. So from even from primary school and secondary school, UNIA can be applied. But remember that if the students are still at the beginning level of autonomy, you give a lot of scaffolding help. It's called structured problem-based or project learning. Then later on, you relinquish that or give more freedom to the student to decide. So making decision in our culture is not easy, because in a family, the parents will make decisions for children, right? So we have to really encourage them with to develop confidence to decide. So even in my class, sometimes I'm afraid my question is wrong. There's nothing wrong, I said, but it's very difficult to encourage because of the culture. But I'm sure that if we patiently help them, they will improve a little bit, bit by bit. And that one here. And self-assessment is one of the ways to help them self-assess, but that should be triangulated with your assessment and peer assessment so that they will be more objective. I think this also decision making about their own learning, their own achievement. It's very important. Okay, Bu Anita.
Yes, one more question, Ibu. We still have some time before we proceed to the next presentations. So the question is from Pak Basikin. SDT. Research claims that one of human psychological needs is the need for being autonomy. However, in a particular context, developing learner autonomy is not an easy job, especially when the motivations for learning is extrinsic. What autonomy supports should teachers provide to such extrinsically motivated students?
Extrinsic, well, I will answer in another way. Once I taught in SM, private SMA with students, no motivation at all, no initiative to ask to, etc. But once I was successful in making them feel at home in my class, feel confident of their achievement, they can, they can propose something. They have a lot of ideas. So I let them to decide which one. So the first thing to do is to make them feel respected. We have to acknowledge their existence. We have to accept them as they are, and we have to show our respect. We tolerate differences. From that, then we guide them to see something promising. We give them some easy tasks first. They can have that, and they have the confidence. And later on, they can have ideas. And only that, I think they can decide. Without any belief that they exist in front of you, then they will not be able to develop their autonomy. So autonomy is not from the beginning. In fact, there is a requirement before being autonomous. There's I think willingness will be, there's confidence. When someone doesn't feel that he exists before you, I don't think they will show anything to you. But if they feel at home in the classroom, feel respected, feel accepted, that's the beginning of our opportunity to help them develop whatever you want, like confidence, autonomous, etc., etc. Because willingness and motivation, etc., is there. Especially the given self-esteem, the personality factors should be addressed first before expecting them to be autonomous. And that is my question, and I have experienced that.
Yes.
More question?
Yes. Thank you, Ibu. Thank you for finally answering all the questions. Now, I would like to invite the last speaker, Associate Professor Dr. Siti Maftuhah Damio. And Ibu Siti Maftuhah Damio is going to deliver a topic on enabler of learning, what suits us best. Ibu Swarsi Madia, we hope you don't mind to stay in the Zoom platform because by the end of the sessions, we are going to have photo sessions, at least for the first and second frame. Yes, Ibu Associate Professor Dr. Siti Maftuhah Damio, the floor is yours.
Ibu Siti, I'm afraid your microphone is still on.
Unmute, please.
Okay, I think I'm on. I'm finding my slides now. Okay. Share. Okay, putting it. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Ibu Anita, our chairperson for this particular seminar on towards autonomous learning, challenges and opportunities amid COVID-19. Thank you very much to Dr. Nur Hidayanto for inviting me to be one of the speakers for this seminar, and also for initiating the collaboration between UITM and UNY. Thank you to our first speaker, Prof. Fuad, and also to our second speaker, Prof. Sumarsi, okay, for their enlightening in defining what autonomy is all about. Okay, for my topic today, let me just introduce myself. Okay, I'm Associate Professor Dr. Siti Maftuhah Damio. I am from the Faculty of Education, University Technology Mara. I have had the experience of teaching in secondary school for 12 years and then joining the university. So my experience is not just of teaching university students, but also teaching secondary students in our school. Okay, let me go on to my topic, which is on the topic of enabler of learning, what suits us best. Okay, I would just like to start with this particular sentence or quote from Israelites in 2015. And he said that how students, or in this context, is actually how we really learn is very mysterious, because at the end of the day, each and every one of us is an individual. We have our own way on how we deal with issues, on how we learn. So when we talk about learning, it is actually something that is mysterious, something that is still a lot that we need to learn. Because if we look at the reality of learning now, to a certain extent, has changed. Okay, so if we look at this particular diagram, okay, this is actually by Julian Stott, and I got this from his blog. Okay, he said that the reality of learning has, to a certain extent, changed a bit. And the first one is actually because the reality of learning now is that it has rapid iteration of approach. Okay, iteration is that, in a sense, that repetition of process. Okay, so nowadays with the development of technology and so on, everything is rapid. everything is very fast. But with this rapid iteration of approach, if we start off by taking it as a strategy, and after that, if we keep on repeating that particular strategy, it can become a skill. And when it is a skill, that will be helpful in our autonomous endeavor. The second thing about the reality of learning is that it has a rapid diversification of technology. You go to the internet, everything is almost there. But the thing is that we need to know, okay, what is the best thing for us? Because the diversity is just too much. It's just a lot. For example, if you take one topic, okay, let's say if we take the topic of even the word autonomy itself, the topic on autonomy, there are many different ways on how the information on autonomy is presented. It could be one, the basic of reading. Okay, we can find articles after articles on autonomy. Or we can also look for audiobook. Or we can go to video, we can go to animation, we can go to gamification, we can go to subtitles. It's a lot, diversified. The information can be presented in many different ways. So the variety is also something that has to be considered when we are talking about the reality of learning. Then, okay, Stott goes on to fragmentation of power. This is something that has been talked about by the two presenters. Okay, in terms of, for example, like the fragmentation means it's actually to a certain extent the breaking of power. Okay, because if we look at historically, okay, if we go into a classroom, the power is more of the teacher rather than the student. But if we look at the reality of learning now, it's breaking, because there are this, there's the give and take that we need to consider, because at times we need to consider that the student might have more power than us as the teacher. So there is that consideration for learning, and we have to take into we have to take fragmentation of power into consideration. And the last one is the evolution of knowledge. Okay, the gradual development of knowledge. Okay, to a certain extent, okay, learning is still learning. Neurologically, cognitively, learning is still learning. However, the content of that knowledge is actually now more co-created. And the knowledge nowadays, they are also very dynamic, rapid. They are, to a certain extent, adaptive and also evolutionary, evolution of knowledge. So it is something that is progressing. It is something that can be shared. It is something that is really dynamic. So to a certain extent, if we look at the reality of learning now, it's actually, there's a slight difference of the reality of learning before maybe COVID-19, or before technology has been used a lot in the education system. So let's go to my topic. So I would then suggest that we need to think about the enabler of learning. What is enabler? Enabler is actually something or someone that makes it possible for a particular thing to happen or be done. Okay, something or someone. So it is not something, or it is not just someone, it's actually both. If we want to make enabler of learning to be efficient and effective, in our education, we need to take both. We need to take the something and the someone. Okay, and we also need to think about the tangible as well as the intangible, because the tangible, it could be something that, okay, what can we use in order for us to teach in class? The intangible is, to a certain extent, what students actually bring into the classroom. What do we bring into the classroom in terms of our thinking, in terms of our experience, in terms of our knowledge? So those are the connection between the intangible and the tangible makes learning more interesting. So I'm proposing that autonomous learning as an enabler of learning. Okay? So autonomous learning as an enabler is not total there. It's not the only thing, but it is one of them that can actually make learning more purposeful, more successful. However, we need also to understand, as much as we want to be an autonomous learner, as much as we want to be an autonomous person, we also have to think that whatever autonomy that we are adapting, it has to have that up to global standards while meeting local needs. Because at the end of the day, if we think about our student, okay, once they graduate from either from university, especially, they are going into the working life. So when we talk about the working life, many of it is actually related to the global standard. And in fact, our education system has to be at global standard. But if we go into our country's educational philosophy, we also have to meet the local needs. So these two are actually very important. So in order for us to be autonomous, we need to address that. Okay, so now, if we look at what has been mentioned by Professor Fuad Abdul Hamid as well as Professor Suarsi Madya, okay, if we look at it, Prof. Fuad has said that, has covered the issue of the role of the learners and the role of the teachers, whereby there is supposed to be a connection between the two of them in autonomy. And then Prof. Fuad also has talked about the individual and the community. Okay, how, in order for you to be autonomy to a certain extent, you are not alone. There are other people around you. There are other people who could actually develop you. So we have to understand also that the word autonomy, the word independent, it doesn't mean that you are on your own, because the surrounding, the community is always there. And then there is also the Western and the Eastern thought. The Western thought, they tend to see autonomy as to be more of a whole, whereas the Eastern thought is more of, there is a bit of, there's more of the individual, and there's also a bit of the community. So it's a different perspective, but I think now, due to whatever that is happening now, COVID-19 and so on, this Western and Eastern context, or is Western and Eastern thought, they are merging. They are becoming, I mean, the gap is not as wide as before. They are beginning, the gap is beginning to get smaller, and they are beginning to merge in terms of the concept of autonomous learning. Prof. Suarsi has also talked about autonomy in terms of the moral right, that each and every one of us have that moral right to develop autonomy in ourselves, because the concept of autonomy is not only useful in learning a language, but it is actually useful in life as a general. Okay, and Prof. Suarsi also talked about the mental, the virtues, the relations, and the environment, which are all very important in order for us to develop our autonomous learning. And finally, before that, there is also the proactive and reactive autonomy, whereby context and environment, whatever that is surrounding us, is actually very important as well. So that's why I would like to say it again, that when we talk about autonomy or when we talk about independent, okay, we have to have that mind shift as well, that autonomy and independent is not you on your own. The community is there. And the community, I mean, how you define community can be very interesting as well, because the community is like the onion skin. You can have, for example, if we take the community is you, and then the peers, and then the classroom, then the school, and then the district. So it goes on from that. Is the onion skin of what we talk about community. And it's even now, it's even more interesting, because when we talk about community, it's actually the internet as well. It's actually the community. Okay, so if we then connect that, the Western and Eastern thought, as what Prof. Wai have said, we can actually look at learning and culture. Malaysia, Indonesia, to a certain extent, we share quite a lot of our learning culture. And if we move on to a bigger one, to Asian and also ASEAN, okay? So I would like to get ourselves connected to the concept of berguru. Okay, if we go into the Islamic concept of learning, that is the berguru concept. Berguru concept is that when you are learning, you have to have that one teacher, or you have to have that teachers, because originally, if we look at the history of Islamic education, what all the scholars did is actually they went to different locations, they learned from their teachers, and then they formed their own opinion of the particular issue. So they have to have teachers, because when you learn without a teacher, you can get sidetracked. So the berguru concept is actually very important. But to a certain extent, this is actually in contrast to the concept of autonomy. Okay. However, if we look at the definition of a successful education process, it says here that it is founded on a number of consecutive, interrelated, and harmonious process between the practitioner and the recipient. That means we have to have this harmonious process between us and the student. And these are all important. Okay, one of the important of the axis in leading to this process is actually the teacher. So even though we wanted to become autonomy, okay, to a certain extent, we cannot discard the importance of the teacher. Or if we are talking about outside of classroom, we are talking about those who may have knowledge, more knowledge than us. So there is always that. But maybe the definition of people with more knowledge now is different, because people with more knowledge now, it doesn't have to be the physical people. It could be what you can get from the internet, videos and that kind of thing. Okay, so we have to remember that in Islam, and also to a certain extent, okay, the concept of berguru has to be there. And this is actually what I looked at in my thesis when I was doing my PhD. I actually looking at, this is actually my topic, Seeking Malay Trainee English Teachers' Perception of Autonomy in Language Learning. I call it ALL, using Q methodology. So the finding that I got was that one, okay, there is in autonomy, okay, but this, in this case, it's autonomy in language learning, but I'm taking it as a generic concept of autonomy, that in autonomy among Malaysian or among Malay, and to a certain extent, I assume Indonesia as well, and Asian and ASEAN as well. There is that concept of interdependence, the we orientation. If we try to ask our student to take the Western concept as a whole concept of autonomy, whereby depending on themselves, they are dependent, they are independent, they are independent, they are, whatever happens, they only depend on themselves. We are going to find it very difficult or challenging to apply that particular concept of autonomy among our students. So that is the first one, the first finding. The second one, I believe that empowerment and flexibility. We have to empower our students. Empower doesn't mean that you give the power to them. What you do is that you include them in your preparation, you include them when you are doing the activity. So you always have the student in your mind, okay? Because when students are able to actually be involved in those, they will find that it is very enriching. Next is flexibility, okay? So autonomy requires no mandatory tools, materials, or settings, okay? So to a certain extent, autonomy is actually a concept. So when it is a concept, it is not something that you can really show that this is autonomy. We can't actually do that, because autonomy is actually something that the student have to understand, and they have to develop that. And as what I think it was, the two speakers also have touched to the idea of positive inclination. The more they see that as positively, the more they are going to learn, and the more they are going to be autonomous. And effort, I think this is one of the, I think if when I look at the question, it's actually one of them. Effort is very important, because in order for you to become an autonomous learner, you become to be an autonomous teacher, or to become an autonomous person, we need to put in effort. There is no such thing as free lunch. So whatever they want to do, if you want to be an autonomous person, autonomous learner, you have to put in effort. Okay, so those are the findings that from the study that I did for my doctorate program. So I see that the we orientation is still very pertinent in the context of our students, especially in Malaysia, among the Malay students. Now, so where does that take us? So at the end of that particular study, when I discussed it with my late supervisor, so I came up with the idea of it is actually autonomously directed. Our students are autonomously directed. So if you look at the continuum, okay, the continuum, there is that continuum of directed, and also there is the continuum of autonomous. So what happened is that actually it moves from there. So if we have it here, okay, so it's 100% autonomous, and if we have it here, it's 100% directed. They are not autonomy. They are not autonomous. So to a certain extent, if we look at it, if we consider that from language learning perspective, I believe that if they are beginners, okay, they would have, for example, if we use percentages, if they are beginners, maybe they may have to have like 60 to 70% of directed. I mean, the teacher has to help, and maybe a 30% of autonomy. And then these percentages will move on, okay? The more they become from beginners, a lot more directed, but as they become more proficient in their language, they can then become more autonomous, okay? because autonomously directed is considered as an amalgamation of the individual and the collectivist. Okay, so in a certain extent, it's actually the self, okay, and also, as what we have said just now, the community, the collectivist. It is not a question of either one is directed or one is autonomous. It is more of the level, how much is directed and how much is of you being autonomous. Okay, so that is what for example, myself and my supervisor came up with, the autonomously directed learners. So the question now is more of, okay, autonomously directed in the new norms. How do we actually, what is the beauty of autonomously directed in the new norms? To a certain extent, okay, what this has happened is that what was not possible before is now made possible. Because before, okay, in order for you to be autonomously directed, most of the time you have to depend on the teacher. You have to depend on whatever that is taking place inside the classroom. Whereas now, if you want to be autonomously directed, it is easier to a certain extent because of the availability of the internet. So your community is not just about the teacher. The community has been made to be bigger. You have a lot more choice. If you have any question about what you are facing, you could always post it. Okay, there are many platforms that you can post it. So you can actually do it, post it or ask to your teacher, okay, or you can also post it using the internet. So it has made it possible for us to have more perspective of whatever issues that we are facing. Because as we said just now, okay, learning is now iterative, diversified, fragmented, and it is evolutionary. So we have to a certain extent, take all this into consideration. Okay. However, one of the issues that we really need to ask ourselves, as per my topic, is enabler of learning, what suits us best. Okay, so if we look at that, what suits us best, okay, we can then say that, okay, what to learn, how to learn, with whom to learn, what materials to use, and the control of learning. This actually has been covered by Prof. Fuad. If we go back, if we can actually correlate this particular slide to our first presenter. The first presenter has defined what to learn. So as a learner, if you are an autonomous learner, you should know what is it that you wanted to learn, okay? To a certain extent, if we take into consideration of our university student, most of the time, what to learn is provided to them, because at the end of the day, we normally have the syllabus, and the syllabus is actually prepared beforehand, and we have then state there what is it that students have to learn. So to a certain extent, as a teacher, we may have to consider this again. Should we really put forward, of what to be learned in that 14 weeks of the semester? Or is it possible for us to ask our student, okay, this is the code, this is a subject, what would you like to add in? Or how would you like to approach, or what would you like to change in the syllabus that we have, in terms of the topic? But we still have to cover whatever that has been planned. It's just that we add in a bit more from the perspective of the student. How to learn it? This is actually very interesting, and this is actually very challenging to all of us. With COVID-19, most things have changed. If before it is highly face-to-face, now it's more of ODL, open and distance learning. Okay, so this is something that if before, for example, people like me, I'm very much comfortable in the face-to-face because I believe that I need to have that interaction with my student. But because of COVID-19 and also because of the pandemic, okay, I couldn't have that anymore. What I need to have is to improve my knowledge on the online learning. Okay, that has provided me with some challenges. But by doing that, I was then forced to understand this younger generation or my student on how they actually learn. And interestingly enough, for many of the students who before this, they say that they wanted to have more of the open and distance learning. Based on what happened last semester when they had a lot of that, they have basically full open and distance learning kind of thing. At the end of the semester, some of them said that, Doctor, bila kami boleh balik ke universiti? Doctor, bila boleh kami dapat face to face? Now they see the value of face-to-face. So it's actually an interactive learning. They get to learn the value of being face-to-face, and I get to learn about how these people, how this student actually wanted to learn. So how to learn? It is something that needs to be taken into consideration. With whom to learn? Some of us, I mean, the question as well from the audience stating that some students are not interested in learning. Maybe if we could, with whom to learn, maybe what we can do is that maybe if we can have a collaboration, okay? So what we can do, maybe we have a collaboration of between one class in my university and one class from UNY. So we connect them at the beginning, okay? But after that, we let them to become autonomous in a sense that they can then
What's wrong? Yeah, it seems that Ibu Siti Maftuhadamio is losing connection. See? Yeah. All right. But Ibu Swarsimadia is still here. Yeah. So perhaps we can just bring some questions up to Ibu Swarsimadia.
Yeah, what did you say, Bu Anita?
Yeah, because Ibu Siti Maftuha is losing the connection.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's not here anymore. We don't know what's happening there. Then perhaps we can just raise the questions from the audience.
In fact, I have some, I have answered some written question from the chat, in fact.
Yes, but we still
Uh,
have some questions in the Q&A feature, Ibu.
Okay,
Those
sorry.
questions are actually addressed to Ibu Siti Maftuha.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so then we can just bring all the questions up, and Ibu Swarsi Madia will probably answer the questions.
Yeah, okay. I have to thank the participants who raised very good questions. My appreciation for, for example, Ibu Hayati, Arni,
Yeah.
Ibu Endang,
Yes.
Well, and others. First, what we have to remember is autonomy is related to decision-making skills. So, deciding something and responsible for the decision is one thing. And it can be nurtured, it can be developed, it can be learned. Now, what I have given in one of the questions is,
Ibu, I think Prof. Bu Siti is
it's
in.
okay, it's back. All right.
Thank you, Bu Swasti.
Yes, Ibu Siti Maftuha Damil will come back to
Sorry for that.
the station. Thank you, Ibu Swarsi Madia,
Okay.
for killing the time.
Yeah, no problem. I'm guarding you. Huh?
Yes, Ibu Siti Maftuha
Okay.
Damil, would you like to continue the presentations?
Okay, this is what I meant by it's scary. Okay, somehow my connection got disconnected. I don't know what happened to the internet, but those are the kind of things that really scare me. Okay, anyway, that is actually related to, if we consider of what materials to use. Okay, so in terms of what materials to use, okay, we have to go and have a look at whether the materials is from online or whether it's offline. Students have to decide on this as well. And even though to a certain extent, in order for us to be autonomous, the students are to find their own materials. But I think to a certain extent, we also need to provide some kind of materials just to set it off, so that the student can move on from that. Now, in terms of control of learning, this is again, we go back to the power, or to the question of, are we going to empower our student? Because when we empower our student to a certain extent, we actually lose a bit of the control of learning. The student will have then more of the control of learning. But I think we have to know our student. One is that we need to know our student, because then only we can suit that to the best of our ability in our classroom. Now, the most interesting thing is actually about all this: what to learn, how to learn, with whom to learn, what materials to use, and also the control of learning, which has been clearly defined by Prof. Fuad, is that related to the issue of it being recursive. Okay, because if we try to understand autonomy, autonomy is not a one-off context. Autonomy is something that is ongoing, and autonomy is also something that is recursive. It goes like that, going forward, but sometimes you stop, and then you have to go backward a bit, and then you go forward a bit. It is not something that is very linear. It is something that is recursive. And this is actually a concept that I think our learner need to understand. Because from the very beginning, when they start their education, we have always said to them that if you want to be clever, you always have to go forward. We have we don't really emphasize to them that in order for you to go forward, you can go backward a bit and then forward again, backward and then forward again. So it is actually a recursive. So that is actually one of the challenge in our autonomous learning, that students find it difficult to be autonomy, because to them, when it comes to learning, it has to be linear. Whereas by right, if we look at it in everything that we do, it is not just linear. It is actually better to be recursive. It has to go like that. Okay, so when we consider that, okay, learning has to be recursive, we have to consider what is the reality of learning in today's world. Okay, so this is the reality of learning in today's world, the 25 minutes a week. Okay, let me just try. I'm not sure whether I can make this bigger, but let me just try to have a look if I can have it, the one that is slightly bigger. Okay, is this better? Can you see this better as compared to the first one? Dr. Anita, can you see this, my slide?
Yes.
Okay,
I see it
so
better.
if we look at the learning, what is the reality of learning today? If we look at this, okay, this is learning while working, okay? So if we look at it, only 1% of a typical work week that employees actually spend on training and development, the formal training and development. So when our student has graduated, they will eventually go to the working life. So when they start working, learning is not emphasized anymore, because at workplace, what they focus more is on productivity. So what they want to see is the result. So if they want you to improve on your result, they may, the employer may give you training and so on, but it's only 1% of the learning. So most of the learning, the worker has to develop themselves. So if you look at, if this worker wanted to develop their own learning, these are the challenges. For example, number of times online every day, it used to be only 5, now it's 27 daily. And the distraction is that every 4 minutes, okay, no, sorry. If you are watching, if you want to engage these people's learning, your video cannot be more than 4 minutes. That's why if you look at whatever is happening now, TikTok is very famous. And there is actually one question from the audience, I think, about TikTok, when learners are more interested in entertainment and also TikTok. This is the reason why, because their concentration cannot go more than 4 minutes. So as instructor, we might want to take that particular finding, that maybe if we are doing it online, we have to have breaks quite often. And then this one, 9 times every hour. People unlock their smartphones up to 9 times every hour. Even for some of us now, while we are doing this webinar, because this webinar is using our laptop, every now and then, I have to admit that this happened. So yeah, these are all the challenges that as educators, we need to be accustomed to, we need to be aware of. Okay, so if we look at that, let's go back to my slide. How do I go back to my slide? How do I go back, yeah? To my slide. Okay. Okay, so if we look at this, these are actually all the challenges that, even though it is said here that it's reality of learning, okay, among employees, but we can actually adopt this concept with our students as well. Now, there is so much of ambiguities, there is so much of complexities when we talk about learning and we talk about autonomous learning. Okay, so how do we navigate these complexities and ambiguities in learning? How do we navigate this in autonomous learning? There's a lot, because I would say that it was easier for me when I was learning, because I didn't have that many distractions. But now the distraction is just too overwhelming. I had to discipline myself in order for me to stay put and do my work. So how do we then address this, the complexities and ambiguities? One of the concepts that I could see is that in terms of emergent learning, we could use this approach, this emergent learning approach, in our learning and also in our autonomous learning. It is actually a powerful process for navigating ambiguity and complexity, because emergent learning, it shifts from the mechanistic view to a living system. What it means here is, before we see learning maybe as something that is mechanistic. In order for you to learn how to read, you need to recognize A, B, C first. But a living system would say to you that, okay, if the student is visual, in order for you to teach them, reading might be using A, B, C. But if the student is someone who is auditory, you might want to teach them in terms of the pronunciation. A, E, U. Okay, so it's a living system. So the student consider them as a living system. They are not mechanistic. And then emergent learning focuses on mastery, performance over time, instead of what is it that they are going to achieve at the end of the day. It focuses more on what is it that they're going to achieve in the long run. So if we look at, in terms of, for example, for those who are teaching writing, rather than looking at focusing on product-based, we focus on process-based writing, whereby you teach them how to write introduction, body, and conclusion over time. And at the end of it, they understand all those processes, and they were then able to come up with a very good essay. And then, because of all these processes actually have that self-reinforcing cycle, because remember, we say that it is actually recursive. So when the students are doing it over time, it is very likely that they are going to master it. So the more they master it, the happier they will be, and they are then would want to learn more. At the end of the day, it is said that emergent solution as getting smarter over time. I think our student will be happy. We will be happy with this particular concept, because emergent learning is dealing whatever is happening here and now. And when we solve it, we become smarter over time. Okay, so in terms of emergent learning, this is actually what it involves. Okay, so autonomous learning, it has that certain criteria that we have already seen from the first two presenters. So when we include emergent learning in the autonomous learning, this is what we are going to add, or instead of saying adding, is actually what we are merging. Okay, emergent learning, we are merging it with autonomous learning. The first is in terms of sense and sense making. Okay, So what we are doing here, sense and sense making, if before we see things as separate, but when we make sense, when we are doing sense and sense making, what we are doing, we are looking at it from a holistic view. We are looking at all these separate things as one, and how they are actually interrelated to each other. So we are looking at the relationship. Okay, we are connecting the dots. So sense and sense making, we are using also our senses, our gut feeling. How is this? How are all these things interrelated to one another? And then there is that generative conversation. This is actually when you talk about it. Okay, sometimes we talk to ourselves. I do that. Okay, or sometimes we talk to others. Sometimes we talk to our friends and so on. But the thing here is that when we do generative conversation, we are trying to come up with solution, or we are trying to come up with something new. So autonomous language learning is actually, again, it's a continuum. It's not so much of just you, but there are others as well. And this is very closely related to collaborating across diversity. If we look at our students, there is the visual learner, there is the auditory learner, there is the kinesthetic learner, all those learners. So they are all diversified. So what we can do is that we can actually ask them to work together in their own way. They are autonomous, but this autonomous individual can work together. Because at the end of the day, for whatever issue that is we are facing, there is actually no one right solution. Every solution can be considered, but what we have will be then the best solution. Even that best solution might not be the right solution. So that is collaborate. Now, I would say that of the 6, okay, I would say comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity is, to me, is the most important, because this is something that emergent learning is sort of summarized into. We have to be, we have to feel comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, just like what happened with COVID-19. Suddenly we are thrown into the deep end of the pool. So how do we climb up? How do we do that? We have to be comfortable with whatever that is happening now, address whatever that is happening now, for whatever is the solution that is the best for the time that we are in now. Whether whatever that we are doing now is the best tomorrow, we don't know. But emergent learning is about here, we have to address the issue now, and tomorrow, if it doesn't work, we improve on it. Thinking is more of, okay, so comfort, uncertainty, if there is a phrase that I would that we can actually use, is actually like building the plane as we are flying it. If there's any problem, fix it there and then. So that is the phrase that actually could be used with emergent learning. And then there is also the system thinking. This is actually so much so related to sense making, whereby rather than we reducing it to different compartments, we are actually looking at it holistically, very similar to sense making. And the last one is actually reflective practices. I think we have been doing it all along, because with reflective practices, we reflect back. It's just that normally when we reflect back, we tend to look at only, okay, what went good, what went wrong, or what went right and what went wrong. But I would say, I mean, literature has suggested that, as what has been presented by Prof. Suarse, is that we need to add a bit more. We need to add our emotion, the quality, the relationship in our reflective. So all these are actually enablers of emergent learning. Okay, so, and I believe that emergent learning actually can be embedded with autonomous learning, then it makes it even stronger. So as I said at the beginning of my talk, autonomous learning as an enabler of learning, I would say that if we then connect it or embed it with another enabler of learning, which is actually emergent learning, it will help to make our learner stronger. So just to conclude my presentation, okay, I would just say that I would just like to read this. The idea of autonomy is likely to remain complex. If you read the literature on autonomy, it is an evergreen topic that people keep on discussing it, people keep on debating about it. It remains complex as the subjectivity of the concept is multifaceted because it is a very subjective concept. Thus, we have to concord enabler of learning that suits us best because at the end of the day, we know ourselves best. When should we learn on our own? When should we include others? In these times of complexity and ambiguities via emergent learning, where autonomy in learning could still flourish. I think with that, I would like to say thank you and do get in touch. Okay, and this is my email, maftuha@uitm.edu.my and drmaftuha@gmail. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Professor Siti Maftuha Dhamil. And then we have quite many questions for you from the audience.
Okay.
But due to the time limitations, we are going to select 3 or 4 questions only.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. The first question is from Ibu Endang Nila.
Okay.
The question is, to what extent the concept of learning, to what extent the concept of learning or learner autonomy is taught in teacher training colleges, both in Indonesia and Malaysia? So this is in Malaysia, definitely.
Okay.
So, yeah.
To a certain extent, we don't actually teach them per se, because what we tend to do in our faculty is that we embed them in training of the teachers. And how we embed them is that because when we talk about autonomy in language learning, we actually have to train them. It is not something that comes to them automatically. But what we do is that we give them pointers. Okay, so in order for you to maybe, for example, that if we are talking about for you to become fast reader, okay, because even in reading, you can actually assess yourself whether you are a fast reader, whether you are an effective reader, and so forth. So when we want to introduce that, what we normally do is that we say to them that if you go to the internet, there is actually specific, for example, like specific website that you can learn how to improve your reading. So what we tend to do in our faculty, in order for us to develop our autonomous trainee teachers, or they are going to be teachers in the future, we tend to give them pointers. And believe it or not, the moment you give them pointers, they go back, they do it, and the next time they come and see you, they will tell you, oh, doctor, there is even better website that you can use. So it's actually sharing. It's a sharing as what autonomy is all about. It's not just you, but it is actually the community as well. So yes, we do encourage autonomy in language learning in our faculty in UITM, in fact, but it is not formally done inside the classroom. It is more of embedded into the system.
Thank you for the answer. And then the next question is from Ibu Nuri Supriyanti. It is interesting to listen to your concept of autonomous learning. Therefore, I would like to ask you to kindly redefine the role of the teacher in your concept.
Okay, Ibu Nori, the role of the teacher. I think if I go back, if we go back to my slide just now, the concept of autonomously directed, okay? We said just now autonomously directed in that particular concept of autonomy is not linear. It is more of recursive, okay? So when it is recursive, you really need to know your student. So your role is actually to adapt to your student. If your students are beginners, okay, and you want to develop autonomy in language learning, your role is actually very high if they are beginners. But when they become more proficient, you need to lower down your role. Okay, so if at the beginning, for you to develop your autonomy among your students, okay, if you are using, for example, as what Prof. Suarse said, problem is actually project-based learning. So from project-based learning, if they are here, you may need to give them certain questions. Okay, in order for you to develop your project, you might want to consider this, and this. Okay, and you might want to present your project based on maybe PowerPoint. Okay, so, but as you move on, as your student move on to become very proficient, you might want to lower down your role. So you might then say to your student, okay, we are going to have, or we are going to do a project on, okay, interesting places in Malaysia and Indonesia. Okay, you are given the freedom to decide on how you want to present them. So their autonomy is in terms of the presentation. So they could present it using videos, they could present it using PowerPoint, they could present it in terms of maybe what pamphlet. But the main thing is that the role of the teacher is that we need to be open to the many different things that students come to us. First thing first is our nawaitu. We need to remember that. And we need to come up with the idea that, okay, if the student come to me with this particular product, I have to be open with that. I cannot just criticize. I have to say that, okay, this is good, but maybe you can improve it by doing that. So the role is not something that is static. It is something that is, it can be tiring, but it can be very nourishing to our soul as well. So teachers, bear with that. Thank you.
It's very challenging.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the answer, Ibu Siti Maftuha. I think we can have one more questions from the audience. Two questions are similar, so they are about teachers' roles actually, and I believe that you have answered the questions as well. Okay, so another question is this: autonomous is ongoing process. Can it improve or reduce? Can it be improved or reduced by psychological and environment aspects? How What should we do to improve it gradually in our class without having face-to-face teaching and learning? Autonomous learning is an ongoing process. Can it be improved or reduced by psychological and environment aspects? Perhaps can it be improved by psychological and environment aspects?
Okay, very interesting question, and actually is a challenging question to answer as well, because it is actually related to not so much of face-to-face. To a certain extent, autonomy, as if we go back to the finding that we have just now, it is actually related to effort as well. Okay, so in order for us to remain or to develop our autonomy to a certain extent, we need to keep on working on it. Okay, if we leave it, that means if we don't do it to a certain extent, it can regress rather than going forward. But you can never lose them. It's not a question about whether having it or not having it. It's more of the level, whether it's going forward or it's going backward. Okay, even if it has going backward, but because you have that autonomy skill in you, the moment you engage yourself, the moment you put in effort into that, it will then get back into track. So to a certain extent, when we talk about autonomy, it's something that if we want to look at the sort of anomaly, is if we look at how we ride a bicycle, right? If we know how to ride a bicycle, if for let's say for 10 years you don't ride a bicycle, but if you ride it again, maybe the first 1 or 2 times you won't be able to ride it, but after that you are going to be able to ride it because you already have that skill. So I would say that autonomy is almost the same. So it can go forward, but at times if you leave it stagnant, it can go regress for a while. But if you put in effort, then it will go again. So yes, autonomy is very much affected by your psychological state, because motivation, psychology, autonomy is very closely to the idea of motivation. And motivation, we have the intrinsic and the extrinsic, we have the society, we have all that. So one of the things is that, as what I think is Prof, I'm not sure, is that the Prof Suarse or Prof Fuad has said that when you go into your class, you have to project that you're happy, that you are pleased to be there with them, that you have all this. So that can actually help your student as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Siti Maftuha Damyu, for the answer. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that we are running out of time, and we have listened to 3 interesting presentations from our esteemed speakers. All the presentations highlight very crucial aspects which trigger the factors that influence autonomous learning. Yeah, it seems that Ibu Swarsi Madia is no longer here. Ibu Swarsi Madia?
She's still here, I think.
Okay. Ibu Swarsi Madia, perhaps you would like to have some more additional explanations or comments on the questions?
Yeah. Well, in fact, all teachers are joining this are enthusiastic from the question, that enthusiastic in applying or in helping students to improve their autonomous learning. But probably we can later on have workshops on that. But what I want to say is that I agree with Professor Siti that, you know, autonomy is recursive, sometimes fluctuates sometimes up and down, up and down. So the teacher has to be patient and lend hand, offer helps, etc. So when the students are beginning to that, the teacher as facilitators should help in the student planning their learning, set the goals, choosing the materials, etc. But let them decide. You, as a resource, you have to show what possible resources can be used. The student will decide which resource will be used. As counselor, when they have difficulty in learning, you have to show the way to learn efficiently, probably through learning strategy training, etc. So, you know, it's optimistic. We can do that. Remember, decision making is the key of that, and responsibility. So responsible decision is the key to autonomy. That is I think my statement, and I'm optimistic if the teachers are committed to helping the students in that patiently, they will eventually get there. Thank you.
Yes, a very interesting point. Teachers' commitments.
Yeah,
Yes.
this commitment. Yeah.
Yes, teachers' commitments.
And teacher educators' commitment too.
Yes. Yes, there's one interesting point actually about teachers' proficiency, how teachers' proficiency influences autonomy. What do you think about that, Ibu?
No. I don't think autonomous learning is determined by proficiency. Now, when you are, you know, I remember when I was still a student, I couldn't speak English, but I could decide what, you know, how how many hours I would read, how that is my autonomy. But I couldn't speak English. So I think autonomy and proficiency is not, you know, it's not always related. So autonomy is a bigger concept. Will go through all aspects of life. Then autonomy is applied in language learning. That one thing. So when you are doing autonomous learning using English, of course, proficiency will help. But if not, then you can learn together how to improve proficiency by helping each other. By you know, I think what is interestingly stated that you know, teachers and students are all learners. So the teachers themselves have to show that they can assess their own proficiency. If they feel that their proficiency is still low, they have to show that they are willing to learn, to make extra miles, to go beyond, you know, so that they also improve. That is one example of learning autonomy. So the teacher also has to improve the learning autonomy in improving their English, and at the same time, they're helping the student to improve their autonomy. So as Ibu sorry if I Ibu Damio, yeah, if I wrongly pronounced your name, but you know, it's a very complex concept, notion, and the development fluctuates. It can fluctuate up and down, etc., etc. It's like our motivation. You know, sometimes we lose motivation. We have to, if we have emotional intelligence, we can you know, recover our motivation, and like autonomy like that. I think it's very important to that. But I propose that, you know, this workshop, this webinar is not the first and the end. We can set up or make a plan to have another which is more practical for teachers, for example. This is another concept. Then the practical through workshops, and they can see you know, how to plan to help the students in improving their learning autonomy. That's my you know, my idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Suarsi Madya. Before we end these sessions, Ibu Siti Maftuha Damio, would you like to have final comments?
Okay. Is it okay? I would just like to conclude in a sense that autonomy is actually something that is very valuable for students to actually, if we say learn, or for students to be able to do, because autonomy is something that is there for life. If you are autonomous, you are likely to be able to solve any problem that comes around your way, be it language, be it life, because when you are autonomous, it means that you know how to go about solving the problem. And also, I would also like to emphasize that we need to demystify the concept of autonomy, because many of us feel that or think that autonomy is on our own. Autonomy is about us. Whereas in this juncture, at this juncture, autonomy is not so much of me on our own. Autonomy is more of me knowing when I should be on my own and when I should be asking direction, asking help from the others surrounding me. And with the advancement of technology, that is even made better because you have the whole world to ask your question to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Siti Maftuha Damiu, for very inspiring comments. It seems that we are limited by time and we should end our sessions. We hope that all the presentations can be of beneficial for the participants. Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all the participations. Thank you for all the questions. And thank you for staying until the end of the sessions. Yeah. We hope that we can see you again in our next webinar, hopefully in the future. And hopefully we can also see and work with Ibu Siti Maftuha Damiu
Inshallah.
again in the future. Yes, inshallah.
Ibu Anita, are we going to take a picture?
Yes, sure. Bu Nila? Yes. Yes, everyone is ready. We are going to have a picture, please. Pak Asadi.
Macam mana nak ambil picture ni?
Yes, you can turn on the video.
Smile.
Yes,
Hi, it's
Nila.
very close from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from all over the countries. We are all here get together, right? Hey, there's someone behind you. Oh my God.
One, three. Okay.
Thank you, Ibu Suwarti. Thank you, Dr. Siti Maftuha.
Thank you, Ibu Siti Maftuha and Ibu Suwarsi Madya. And thank you all the participants. See you again in the future in our webinar. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Anita, the slides, how do I give it? I'll
yeah.
send.
Yes.
I'll give it to Dr. Noor.
Yes, could you
Yeah,
please
just send it to me.
Dr. Nur Hidayanto.
Okay.
We are going to distribute the slides to all the participants.
Okay, I will then email it to Dr. Noor.
Yeah,
Everyone, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye, Prof. Suwarse.
Bye-bye.
I'll be in touch as well with you.
Okay.
Maybe there may be projects and so on.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay? Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Dr. Siti Maftuha. Bye.
Bye.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you, 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 thank you.